Morning, guys. Happy Tuesday. Gonna go ahead and do a video to answer a question posted on the BX Dungeons and Dragons forum on Facebook by Andrew Cookson, who writes, "Would you please get a scan of some such and show us the layout of how you went about this feat?" Kind of in reference to my map of the stars for my homebrew world. I'd like to do something similar for my campaign, not appropriating your work but using it as a guide. Thanks. I used the 2 moons like in Greyhawk, so that would add some additional elements. What you have done is wonderful, and any explanation would be most welcome by many, I am sure. Why, thank you, Andrew. Sure, I would be happy to kind of show you my thought process behind this. So, as many of you are probably aware, so you've got your planet here. The night sky, and this is, information I'm sure most of you all know, but I'm going to talk about it anyway so that the whole explanation makes sense, okay, to those few people who maybe don't know. So the night sky is usually divided into 2 hemispheres. A northern hemisphere, if this is your planet here, these are the stars that you can see in the sky at night when you're north of the equator and a southern hemisphere. And these are the constellations and how the stars look south of the equator. What I have shown on the BX forum is strictly, since I'm working on my northern campaign, a map of the sky in the north and the different constellations and months of the year as they are ascribed to the gods and goddesses that are fantasy creations in the northern part of the world. Those constellations would be different in the southern hemisphere, as well as the different gods and goddesses that they are ascribed to or assigned to for like the different months of the year. So if you have 12 months times 2, that's going to be 24 different entities that you're going to need to ascribe to the 12 months of the year in the northern and southern hemispheres. So if I grab a copy of my map, this is an older hand-drawn version that I did a while back. Everything south of about this line is going to be in the southern hemisphere, and everything north of this line, which is actually most of the map, is going to be in the northern hemisphere. Now, right now I'm working on my West Marches campaign up here in the Warholds of the Northmen, but I've also run quite a long campaign for my kids and some friends going back several years in this area called the Dragon's March, and specifically the Kingdom of Daria and this area on the border between the Kingdom of Kyrene over here and Daria, where there's this place called the Bitterfrost Spellblight. So this northern hemisphere map is fun because it can be used for both of those areas as far as how it all ties into magic item creation and that sort of thing. And then here in the south, the only place that I've also the Duchy of Oregon I've also worked on, so that's cool. The only place that I've done a lot of adventures in for my kids is here in the Emirate of Sakhalin. We've talked about and done little forays into the Great Scimitar Desert and the city-states of Carthusia, but that was when they were being pirates in the Emirates of Sakhalin. which is kind of a jungle setting here in the south. So although I have, an idea and just general write-ups of what's going on in Sorceress Yan and the Necrogarchy of Ling and all these other locations, really the only places I've done any kind of significant amount of map work and campaign development are in the Dragon's March, Warholds of the North, the Duchy of Rorgan, and the Emirate of Sekalon. And that's over probably 10 years, a decade of gameplay. So, and we'll get back to the star map in a minute, but as far as development goes, like each of those areas is going to have a kind of regional map that I've done in color, similar to this one. It's got the whole area kind of mapped out somewhat abstractly. And then on top of that, for running the campaign in the area, for every one of these areas, I've done that mile by mile overland map. Let me see if I can find some. So like, here's my old book for the Dragon's March. So in this book, I kind of did those overland maps in pretty loose style, kind of like this. But I have another similar book for the Emirates of Sekalon and the Duchy of Rorgan, where while the kids are adventuring and they're my friends, they may have a generic map that overlooks this area that says, okay, we're starting in the village of Hounds Cross, and we know that this village of Skittern is down the Stoneway, which is this road here to the southeast. We know that the local duke, because this is like a minor duchy in the kingdom of Daria, up this way is where the duke has his castle. We know that there's a swamp south of us called the Boglands. We know if we follow the Snowbend ride out here to the southwest, that will run towards the coast and to major port city. And we know that the hobbits have a village up here called Tadwick that's surrounded by these sort of orange with little red circles. These are kind of like orchards. This is my key for areas of orchards and cultivated lands. So anywhere you see that, it's well-established farms. So what they actually explore as they're moving from Hounds Cross down this road towards Skittern, and maybe seeing this huge hill off here in the distance and getting curious about that, maybe they see some smoke rising from that location. What they actually encounter from mile to mile is actually plotted out mile by mile here in this terrain map. And I run this terrain like levels of a dungeon, so the easiest areas, quote unquote easiest, are going to be here on the roads and in these cultivated areas, and some of these fields closest to the roads, these areas of meadows and open land, which you would consider to be like level 1 of the dungeon. And then the monsters become more appropriate into this area that's light woods here, and you might consider that like level 2 of the dungeon. Into hill country, that might actually jump all the way up to level 4 of the dungeon. And those of you who are older, who remember the old books of D&D, understand that as you move from dungeon level to dungeon level, the challenge of the monsters, the difficulty of the monsters actually rises pretty dramatically in some cases from level to level. So the difference between the kind of encounters you would have down on this road versus what you'd run into going, 1, 2, 3, even 4 miles to the northeast, you might be running into something quite a bit more dangerous up here. And what that's taught my kids and my players over time is that you have to make decisions about whether you want to enter those areas and whether you're ready for them or not, or if those are areas that you might want to go around. So, like here in the Boglands, you have standard swamps, which might be an area that's like a level 2 or 3 dungeon area that's swamp themed. But then you've got the deep Boglands here, which are like a level 4 or 5 area that's really, really, really dangerous. So if you're trying to cut across the Boglands from Skitter, and maybe you have an emergency and you need to cut through the Boglands over here to this bridge to help out the King's guards over here for some reason, and you decide, okay, we're 4th level characters and we want to cut across the bogs. We don't want to go all the way down the road and cut over. As you're going as the crow flies, you're going to go around that. We're not going to go straight across this area, which becomes... and as I describe the areas, I'm pretty upfront with the players as far as the descriptions of those areas go. Have the deep woodland areas, and those are sort of similar to the hill country, although they're themed differently, obviously, because they're a deep, dark forest. So if there's something that the player characters want to investigate in an area of deep forest, they have to make an informed decision about whether they've prepared themselves for that or not, or if they maybe want to just skip that for now and wait till they're tougher, or go around that area. Because through experience, they've pretty quickly learned that those areas are, if you go into the deep, dark heart of the forest, that it's a lot more dangerous than out here in sort of friendly country. So anyway, getting back off of all that tangent into making your own star maps. So the first thing you're going to want to do is just draw a circle in the middle of your paper. If you want, you can divide it between day and night, although nothing's going to move on your star map, so that's just kind of a to your taste. And then around that, you're first going to want to divide that into 4 different parts. Okay. And that isn't any kind... Okay. So something that's kind of come up a few times that I've been sort of hesitant to talk about is that some people, when they see this and they see some of my props, spellbook pages and things like that, they're like, oh my god, people are going to freak out about this stuff. And if they are, then I don't really have a lot of control over it. I will share my personal point of view on that, and that is that the stars have been in the sky for as long and longer than humans have existed. All kinds of different cultures have looked up at the stars and made up their own symbols by looking at which stars were brighter and kind of assigning them, I see an outline of a bird there, or I see an outline of a ship, or I see the outline of a pitcher. And what people in different cultures have seen up in the sky, the night sky, they're looking at imagined those constellations to be different from culture to culture. So the Chinese constellations are different than what you might have in Western constellations. And really that is just human beings looking up at the stars and using their imaginations to try to make sense of their environment. Nobody was secretly going around and occultly, summoning the stars into the sky to make that happen. It's a perfectly natural environment. People are just trying to figure it out. And so, when people are like, okay, so your prop spellbook pages or this kind of thing are going to freak out some people. I'm like, well, they're probably going to be freaked out by all kinds of stuff. I mean, there are people who today who still firmly believe the Earth is flat. Okay, I think some guy recently blew himself up in a rocket about that sort of stuff. So I'm just really not going to worry about it. I don't have time to worry about that kind of nonsense. So, at any rate, when you're making your star map for the night sky, first you're going to divide it into 4 quarters. And then you're going to divide that again in groups of 3. And this is just an easy way for you to create a map of in 12 pieces, like 12 pieces of a pie. That's going to be the 12 months of the year. Okay? And if your fantasy world is the same size of the Earth and it also has a similar calendar and it has months that are 30 days long and that sort of thing, that's going to help go a long way to sort of standardizing this and make it a lot easier for you to make. If you make your world a lot bigger or smaller than Earth and you have 20 different months versus 12, well, you're just going to have to divide up your night sky into 20 pie parts. And instead of ultimately needing 24 different supernatural beings or gods or whatever you want to assign to those months to be sort of in charge of those months for your magic item creation, then you'll need 40 because you'll need 20 in the north and 20 in the south. So now that you've got your months, you're just going to draw a circle around the outside of that. And then another circle, and this is just to give you a place to write in the names of the different gods that you're going to assign to each month. Okay. And since we're just, in my world, I'm just sort of mirroring the planet Earth, then I start over here and I say, okay, well, this is going to be January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. And then you do have a quick decision to make as far as, you've got your 4 seasons. Spring, obviously you've got spring, you've got summer, you've got fall, and you've got winter. All right, so for me, I decided that the months, so you need 3 of each, right? So that you can divide your year into 4 seasons equally. So for me, I decided that the months of November, December, and January for me would be winter. And that would mean that February, March, and April for me is spring. And then May, June, and July is summer. And August, September, October is fall. Okay. Then in here, you're going to want to assign names to these months. And in my case, I went with some of the names of the gods from my campaign setting. So let's take a quick look at that. This is my journal that I use for everything that has to do with magic in my world, because world building is just a really fun hobby for me. I enjoy it. I've said this many times before, but I enjoy this process of thinking about how the world works and how the stars look and how magic works. I enjoy that easily as much as running the actual games, and I enjoy running the actual games a ton. So for me to invest time into my homebrew setting where I'm working on all this stuff is not a labor for me. It's part of the hobby. In the same way that you might have people who really, really love painting miniatures, and they have a huge collection of miniatures. They enter miniature painting competitions. They make terrain. I think in that case, nobody really blinks an eye at people who engage in the hobby at that level. But I have to say that, homebrewing is kind of a dying thing because it's so time consuming. So people kind of, not always, but sometimes people look a little askance at me. I've seen in some of the forums where I can be sort of the oddball out who's one of a few people maybe out there who's working on homebrew stuff to this extreme, I guess, is what people would consider it. So, fair enough. But I'm just trying to explain, I do this because I just love that part of it. I love writing, I love drawing, I love making maps, obviously. So that's just my version of mini painting, okay? It's the best way I can describe it. So this book has a lot of material in it going back a long time. Magical alphabets and spells and and these are just props. This is the spellbook page for the light spell. And when I was first starting on these spellbook pages, I wanted to use the old school D&D tropes as an inspiration, where wizards had to move their hands when they were casting a spell. I knew that was something that I wanted to have on my prop spellbook pages and scrolls. They had magic things they had to say to cast their spells. And while I was thinking about it, I was like, hey, in AD&D we had, spell components. Light had a spell component that was a firefly, and I wanted to include those things. And then I figured, a wizard who was worth his salt would probably put in some notes about what was the best time of year to make a magic item, use the light spell to enchant an item, so that a lot of expensive materials and time weren't wasted on trying to create it at a less auspicious time of the year when, the moons and the stars weren't aligned. So that's kind of where I was coming from in this. And part of the inspiration for doing this whole thing was that I've known for 10 years that one of my major plot hooks is an ongoing struggle between the legitimate arcane casters and a group called the Pentagarchy and the old cabals of the guild wizards who have fallen out of favor and who are now in hiding, and their old spells are considered heretical. So that's been a really fun element. Is if you find if you're playing a wizard in my world, you'll start with a couple of spellbook pages that are maybe a key for some of these notes, and then maybe you find a scroll. Well, only you as the wizard is going to know if that scroll is a legitimate Pentagarchy approved spell, or if it's some kind of heretical magic. And it's going to be up to you to decide whether you're going to destroy that, or you're going to turn it over to the Pentagarchy, or if you're going to secretly keep it to yourself and just tell your adventuring companions, oh yes, this is fine, this is just a nothing spell, it's a first level spell that's totally approved, this is charm person, when in actuality what you have is like a third level spell that turns your opponent into a pile of goop. Okay, so anyway, that's where all this was coming from. So here's my version of this map, and so you can see that it's just what we've been going over. It's just a circle divided into 12 parts, and then I've assigned the names of different gods and goddesses that are in my campaign to each month. And then along with that, I've also assigned a symbol, an element, or some sort of key component to each one of these gods. So when you're talking about that, let me see. So this is Gulvig and this is Geimer. So let's see. December is Gulvig and opposite that is Geimer. So when you start making your list of gods and goddesses, if you're homebrewing, something that you might consider is having some of the gods be in a pantheon that are considered paired up. Okay. Let me see if I can find these characters here on my list. All right. So I have a couple of pairs here. I have Gerda and Freyr. Remember, this is the North Sky, so you have more northern-oriented gods and goddesses and beings in this map, okay? Gerda and Freyr are the Northman gods of spring and autumn, okay? So here's Gerda right in the heart of spring, and here's Freyr right in the heart of autumn. They are two of the four Northmen primary gods which personify the four seasons. Gerda and Freyr are married in the lore of the North. Gerda represents fertility, beginnings, youth, beauty, and renewal. So, springtime stuff. Gerda is a shapeshifter with a special affinity for hawks and wolves. Freyr represents plenty, harvest, happiness, fulfillment, crafting, and endings. Freyr is also a shapeshifter with a special affinity for boars and bears. And this ties directly into the conflict I have between two orders of druids, which the bad guy, the Wraith Lord, originally there was just one united order of druidry in the north, as sort of one of the original religions in the north. And when the Wraith King marched into the north with his army, he was able to seduce away part of the druids and have them abandon their connection with nature. So he literally convinced them to give up their ability to speak with animals and to shapeshift into bears and wolves and things like that, and turn their gaze up towards the heavens in pursuit of wealth and a different kind of a power. And so Gerda and Freyr remain the gods that are associated with the Ragged Cloak Druids, which are the original good guys, shape-shifting druids of the north. And Gulvig and Geimer are now associated with their opposites in the druids of the Henge. So Geimer and Gulvig are the northern gods that represents the seasons of summer and winter. Geimer is portrayed as a rich king adorned with rings and chains of gold. He's usually portrayed as a portly figure with a balding head and short beard. Geimer represents wealth, success in negotiations, and merchant affairs. He also represents schemes and deception, and sometimes is associated with sloth. Gulvig is the black-eyed goddess of winter. Gulvig represents darkness, cold, famine, betrayal, and cruelty. She is the only evil goddess in the Northman pantheon, outside of Aglaika, who's not really considered part of the current pantheon. So that's what's going on with that. Okay. So there are going to be, I think, along with, dividing your pantheon up into kind of opposites that can sit across from each other in the different seasons, you're going to want to assign certain kinds of elements to them. Let me get a piece of scratch paper here somehow. All right, and so some of these elements are going to be sort of the standard. So you're going to need earth, air, fire, and water. And this is only because so many arcane spells tie directly into these four central components, okay? So if you were going to enchant a wand with a fireball spell, it makes sense that you'd want to create that fireball wand on a month that is connected with the element of fire. So you're going to want to choose a god in your pantheon that is got an affinity with fire, and in my case it's down here in the month of July. It's Sargon, the god of the sun and fire, and he is associated with a constellation that is the sword. and that is the elemental symbol for fire. Okay, so any kind of fire-based magic item that you would create, it just becomes an immediate no-brainer that gets connected. If you're making spellbook pages and that sort of stuff as props, that's the best month for that. Conversely, if you want to make a magic ring of water breathing, well, you're going to want to make that on a month that's associated with water. If you're going to make a ring of levitation, you're going to want to make that ring on the month of air. If you're going to make a magical wand or a rod or staff that has to do with making the rock to mud spell or wall of stone or something like that, well, that's a no-brainer that has to do with earth. Okay? Then along with that, you have the creation of things like +1 swords and different magical swords. And so you might consider having something that has to do with iron or steel. A month that's kind of connected to that. And I have that. Gerda, the goddess of the spring, is actually associated with iron. Okay. When you talk about wealth and gold and that sort of thing, you may have magic items that are made from gold, or you might have magic items that detect gold or that sort of thing, and so you're going to want to have a symbol for gold somewhere, and that's here in the month of February under the god of Aknabog is associated with gold. Geimer, who is the slothful god of riches, has a chest as his constellation, but his symbol is actually the symbol for tin. And I love history and all kinds of archaeological stuff, and so I know that tin was used in the creation of bronze, and that on Earth back in the day, that most of Europe did not have a supply for, here's Geimer, that did not have a supply of tin. And so major trade routes were established and dedicated to getting supplies of tin steadily into Europe so that they could make bronze artifacts and weapons and that sort of thing. And so tin was at the heart of the economy during the entire Bronze Age. So in my world, it's the same thing. If you wanted to make bronze stuff way back in the day, all of that wealth pouring through and the trade lanes was associated with Geimer. Even more valuable in some ways than gold was, okay, back then. And that's why that's sort of assigned to him. And in more recent times, there's a process called tinning, where you take tin and you use it to line the inside surfaces of pots and that sort of thing, and it protects vessels from rust. And so even though bronze weapons and objects are not as prized now, during a period which is more like iron and steel weapons, tin is still considered to be pretty valuable, because it's how you make metal vessels that are not going to rust and contaminate your food. So it still has some value there. Let's see. As far as these constellations go, I have one for the staff. I have a sword. I have a chest. I have a ship. I have the hurricane, which is associated with the goddess Tempest, which is a sea goddess, one of several sisters that control the winds of the sea. And the different sea goddesses, Tempest, Silky, who else do we have on here? Anybody? I think Callisto is a moon named after one of the sea goddesses. they are prayed to by sailors crossing the oceans, and the biggest ocean on my map is the Sea of Harlots. And that's because these goddesses of the different winds, different directions of the winds, are considered to be very fickle, and sailors have to kind of negotiate with them with their offerings. And sometimes they seem to cooperate, and sometimes they don't. So that's where the Sea of Harlots gets its name. So these are pretty simple. You go through, you assign your different gods to these different months, and you say, well, I've got a goddess of stormy weather. That's one of the goddess of the north wind. What symbol could I put up in the heavens that would make sense for that goddess? And so, it's whatever you come up with. And creating these is really simple. Something, when I was sort of investigating all this and how to do it, I discovered is that the different brightnesses of stars started to enter these star maps kind of right around the era that I'm in, where it's sort of an Iron Age with steel weapons and that sort of thing. My world isn't really a high fantasy Renaissance world. It's kind of coming out of the age of Conan, really. So, at any rate, star maps are going to indicate relative brightnesses or sizes, as they considered them to be, of stars in the sky. And so, just a little tiny circle, well, that's kind of a dimmer star in a constellation or nearby. A circle with some little rays coming out of it, well, that's kind of a medium brightness or size star, okay? And then one with 2 circles and the rays coming from the outside, those are the brightest stars in your constellation. And so you just kind of throw those down, whatever you think looks kind of cool, and you connect them up, and you make your constellation, and you stretch it across the month. In some cases, you might even have constellations like the dragon up here in the month of Mordenak in January that kind of crosses into Gulvig, and at the head of it into the month of Aknabog. So it's just really up to you. I try to keep mine pretty well separated out because it just makes it easier. And then, in my world, I have 3 different moons, and these are, the smallest moon is Callisto, and then you have Ephem and Irene. Okay, and so I kind of just imagine this being in a wizard's book. It's a drawing of a physical device. And so there's a bolt here that holds this brass ring on here that can be adjusted. So you can turn this to match the time of year, and then you can slide this down and move it around on the surface of this device to what makes sense for what you're seeing in the night sky, depending on the time of the year. So you can kind of line these up to match what you see the moons are at in the sky, okay? And so when you're talking about magic item creation on a spellbook page, not only will I indicate, let me see if I can get an example for you. Yeah, well, they all have it. Not only, so this is Tempest, right? So not only will I indicate the month, the element, which is salt from the sea, goddess of the North Sea. So this spell is a heretical spell, but it's best enchanted during the month of Tempest, which is in May. And when Callisto is looking like this, which I think is waxing, and Euphame always comes first. Euphame is full, and Irene is waning. So the moons in the sky have to look like this for the full power of this spell to be enchanted into an object. And you have guidelines for that in the BX rules, where a rod or a wand has a certain number of charges. Well, I just make it really simple. So you have your base roll of how many charges an object gets, but if it's made on the right day, I might give it a bonus of +5 to whatever you roll. Okay, so if you have 2d10 charges and staff, then you get 5 plus 2d10 charges if you make it on the right day of the year. And so you're much more likely, even if you roll crappy or you have a difficult result as a wizard making your magic wand, you're much more likely that your wand's going to turn out decently or even excellently if you do it on the right time of the year. And it kind of keeps you from blowing several thousand gold pieces worth of materials to make a magic item. Let's see. I also kind of indicate the position of where the sun kind of rises and falls and what constellation the sun is coming up in. Here, my sun's at Astra. Got the planet in the middle here, Chimera. I've got a comet that circulates through the northern sky as sort of a portent of things going on. And that comet is called Styx. So if you want there to be like something that appears in the sky as a big sign that something big is going to happen, maybe one of the gods is going to disappear, or there's going to be a big war, or there's going to be some major change, then you can include a comet appear somewhere. I also have one visible planet that I don't indicate on this, but there's one visible known planet, quote unquote. They know it's not a star because of how it moves and how it looks in the sky. They don't really the people in my world don't really understand that it's a planet like the one that they live on. They just know that it's not the same as these stars. And it's not a moon, and it's not the comet. And so that object is called Charon. And depending on Charon's position in different constellations, I'm kind of holding that in my back pocket as something else that could happen. Whether that's like a thing for a prophecy for heroes, or the return of a villain, or that sort of thing. That's what I am doing with that. So that is how you make this. And obviously you do not have to go into this level of detail. In fact, I don't even know if I would recommend this for most dungeon masters, because it's admittedly crazy over the top overkill, unless you really just love making your world, and that's something that you have as much time, as much fun working on as anything else. And to do this, I would just chip away at it. Don't drive yourself crazy trying to do every single first level spell or second level spell or whatever, or make scrolls for every game. Just, make a prop for your next game. Make your star map, make a prop for your next game. This is probably one of the most useful tools, because then you can tie it into all of the magic item creation and that sort of stuff. But yep, that's what that's all about. So I guess I'm going to wrap up that. Thankfully, I was able to lift the 15-minute limit on my videos. So this one is super long at 43 minutes, but we covered a lot of material, and hopefully that gives you everything you need to fill out your own one of these. All right. So, Andrew, I hope that this answers your question, probably more than you had wanted. And I hope you have an awesome day, and thanks for asking. Have a good one.